Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Wednesday, February 26, 2025. President Donald Trump holds his first cabinet meeting of his second term at the White House, where Elon Musk discusses the work of the Department of Government Efficiency to cut waste and the federal workforce. President Trump is asked about the House Republican budget blueprint that narrowly passed Tuesday night and whether Medicare and Medicaid spending will be cut to offset some of the proposed tax cuts. The House passes a bill to reverse a Biden administration methane emissions fee for oil and gas drilling. Senate confirms U.S. Trade Representative nominee Jamieson Greer. Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. talks about the first death in the measles outbreak in West Texas, a child who was not vaccinated. Supreme Court hears a case claiming reverse discrimination. A heterosexual woman from Ohio says she lost 2 jobs to gay co-workers that she says were less qualified. We'll talk about it with Washington Post Supreme Court reporter Justin Jouvenal. And British Prime Minister Keir Starmer prepares to come to Washington, D.C. to meet with President Trump about the war in Ukraine and other issues. CBS News writes that President Trump publicly backed efforts by Elon Musk and the Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, to slash government spending and cut the federal workforce on Wednesday, with the president downplaying potential conflicts between Musk and members of his cabinet. Mr. Trump opened his first cabinet meeting shortly before noon at the White House with Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth seated beside him. For more than an hour, Mr. Trump weighed in on a wide range of topics, fielding questions from reporters on Ukraine, Russia, Taiwan, the House Republicans' budget plan, and more. But first, the president allowed Musk, who is not a member of the cabinet, to address the group and discuss his work to cancel contracts and fire workers across the executive branch. Musk is not formally leading the DOGE task force, but has been tasked with overseeing its work by the president. That was from CBS News. Here's Elon Musk.
I actually just call myself a humble tech support here because this is actually, as crazy as it sounds, that is almost a literal description of the work that the DOGE team is doing, is helping fix the government computer systems. Many of these systems are extremely old. They don't communicate. There are a lot of mistakes in the systems. The software doesn't work. So we are actually tech support. It's ironic, but it's true. The overall goal here with the DOGE team is to help address the enormous deficit. We simply cannot sustain as a country $2 trillion deficits. The interest rates, just the interest on the national debt, now exceeds the Defense Department spending. We spend a lot on the Defense Department, but we're spending like over $1 trillion on interest. If this continues, the country will become de facto bankrupt. It's not an optional thing, it is an essential thing. That's the reason I'm here. And taking a lot of flack, and getting a lot of death threats, by the way. I mean, I'd like to stack them up, you know. But if we don't do this, America will go bankrupt. That's why it has to be done. And I'm confident at this point, knock on wood, you know, knock on my wooden head, there's got a lot of wood up there, that we can actually find $1 trillion in savings. That would be roughly 15% of the $7 trillion budget. And obviously that can only be done with the support of everyone in this room. And I'd like to thank everyone for your support. Thank you very much. This can only be done with your support. So it's really, DOGE is a support function for the president and for the agencies and departments to help achieve those savings and to effectively find 15% in reduction in fraud and waste. And we bring the receipts. So people say, like, well, is this real? Just go to doge.gov. We line item by line item, we specify each item. So, and I should say, we will make mistakes. We won't be perfect, but when we make a mistake, we'll fix it very quickly. So, for example, with USAID, one of the things we accidentally canceled very briefly was Ebola prevention. I think we all want Ebola prevention. So we restored the Ebola prevention immediately, and there was no interruption. But we do need to move quickly if we're to achieve a $1 trillion deficit reduction in financial year 2026. It requires saving $4 billion per day, every day, from now through the end of September. But we can do it, and we will do it. Thank you.
Elon Musk at President Donald Trump's first cabinet meeting at the White House. He was standing when he made those remarks. He did not have a seat at the main table, but a place in the outer circle of chairs. President Trump then invited the reporters in the room to ask questions to Elon Musk, and some of them were about his email to federal employees, asking for about 5 bullet points of what they accomplished last week, along with the warning that failure to respond will be treated as a resignation.
About half of the government employees so far appear to have responded to your request for what they've been doing over the past week. Is there a timeline in place for next moves for people being fired? And when can people expect to see results from that?
Yes. Well, to be clear, I think that email perhaps was best interpreted as a performance review, but actually it was a pulse check review. Do you have a pulse? Do you have a pulse and 2 neurons? So if you have a pulse and 2 neurons, you can reply to an email. This is, I think not a high bar, is what I'm saying. Anyone can accomplish this? But what we are trying to get to the bottom of is we think there are a number of people on the government payroll who are dead, which is probably why they can't respond. And some people who are not real people, like they're literally fictional individuals that are collecting paychecks. Well, somebody's collecting paychecks on a fictional individual, so we're just literally trying to figure out, are these people real? Are they alive? And can they write email? Which I think is a reasonable expectation for the American public would have at least that expectation of someone in the public sector.
Mr. Musk, roughly 1 million employees.
It's not a high bar, guys. Come on.
Roughly 1 million employees have responded so far to this email. Does that mean that the remaining 1 million or so federal employees now risk being terminated? And is it your understanding and expectation when you post a directive on X that the cabinet secretaries will follow that order? Because several agencies have instructed employees that this is voluntary or not to respond.
Yeah. Well, I guess it was like last week, the president encouraged me via Truth Social and also via phone call to be more aggressive. And I was like, okay, yes, sir, Mr. President, we will indeed do that. The president is the commander-in-chief. I do what the president asks. And I said, can we send out an email to everyone just saying what did you get done last week? And the president said yes, so it did that. We got a partial response. We're going to send another email. But our goal is not to be capricious or unfair. We want to give people every opportunity to send an email. And the email could simply be, what I'm working on is too sensitive or classified to describe. Like literally just, that would be sufficient. I think this is just common sense.
And what is your target number for how many workers, employees you're looking to cut total?
We wish to keep everyone who is doing a job that is essential and doing that job well. But if the job is not essential or they're not doing the job well, they obviously should not be on the public payroll.
I'd like to add, wait a minute. I'd like to add that those million people that haven't responded, though, Elon, they are on the bubble. I wouldn't say that we're thrilled about it. They haven't responded. Now, maybe they don't exist. Maybe we're paying people that don't exist. Don't forget, we just got here. This group just got here. But those people are on the bubble, as they say. Maybe they're going to be gone. Maybe they're not around. Maybe they have other jobs. Maybe they moved and they're not where they're supposed to be. A lot of things could have happened. I wouldn't say that Biden ran a very tight administration. They spent money like nobody's ever spent money before, wasted money.
President Donald Trump and Elon Musk with cabinet secretaries at the White House for today's first cabinet meeting of the second Trump presidential term. There's a story from The Hill, a Wednesday memo from the Office of Personnel Management, OPM, and Office of Management and Budget, OMB, directs agencies across government to turn over plans for widespread layoffs of federal employees by March 13th. The memo, which provides more specific guidance after a February 11th executive order from President Trump mandating layoffs, requires agencies to break down their plans for a reduction in force and broader restructuring of their agencies. It also indicates the White House is eager to speed the shedding of federal workers, noting OPM can cut in half the 60-day notification period for employees being laid off, meaning swift-moving agencies could begin notifying affected employees as soon as April. That was from The Hill. And from News Nation, a House subcommittee on delivering on government efficiency, acronym DOGE, met Wednesday to examine U.S. foreign aid spending. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, Republican of Georgia, chairwoman of the subcommittee, said the hearing comes as Americans are shocked to discover how their taxpayer dollars have been spent overseas. The hearing follows the Department of Government Efficiency's downsizing of the U.S. Agency for International Development as the Trump administration works to dismantle the agency that oversees foreign aid and development programs. Greene opened the hearing about how USAID has been weaponized to undercut U.S. interests overseas. Reporting from News Nation. C-SPAN covered this hearing, and another member of the committee, Robert Garcia, Democrat of California, said this about the cost-cutting efforts in foreign aid and other parts of the federal government.
So this is obviously our second hearing on DOGE, and certainly as Elon Musk and Donald Trump work together to destroy our federal agencies. Now, a lot has happened in just the last few weeks since DOGE has been off raiding the federal agencies that we care so much about. We know that FAA staff have been fired, making our airspace less safe. Veterans Affairs staff have been fired, risking services for our vets. Food safety and health staff have been fired as we face a bird flu pandemic. And all of our agencies have been thrown into chaos by Elon Musk's emails demanding, of course, that federal workers respond to what they're doing in the last week, which he's now had to, of course, retract. Now, we're here today to discuss Elon's attack on foreign aid, which has been severe. And I want to also bring, again, this is a pic of co-president Elon Musk, who, of course, is leading DOGE. And I brought this pic, of course, to our last hearing. And I know some folks were upset by it. But just to be clear, we know that Elon Musk is dangerous, he's incompetent, he's chaotic, and he's killing programs that we rely on. We know that he's helping to push through massive cuts to Medicaid that could rip health care away from millions. He's pushing tax cuts that will benefit him and his billionaire friends. And he is causing real harm to federal workers. Now, some of Mr. Musk's most damaging actions have actually been towards USAID, which we're discussing today. Over 14,000 adults and 1,500 infants have now been estimated to have possibly died because of the Trump administration's attack on AIDS treatment programs that are actually ongoing, as we know. They're hurting real people and damaging our national security.
Congressman Robert Garcia, Democrat from California, at today's hearing of the House DOGE subcommittee. He referenced the budget resolution that the House passed Tuesday night. It has a goal of $2 trillion in spending cuts, along with $4.5 trillion in tax cuts and more than $100 billion increase in immigration enforcement and the military. The budget resolution passed the House by a vote of 217 to 215. One Republican, Thomas Massie of Kentucky, voting no with all the Democrats. Returning to President Trump's cabinet meeting at the White House, the president was asked about where cost savings would come from.
The spending bill that passed last night aims to cut $2 trillion.
Right.
Can you guarantee that Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security will not be touched?
Yeah, I mean, I have said it so many times, you shouldn't be asking me that question, okay? This will not be read my lips. It won't be read my lips anymore. We're not going to touch it. Now, we are going to look for fraud. I'm sure you're okay with that, like people that shouldn't be on, people that are illegal aliens and others, criminals in many cases, and that's with Social Security. We have a lot of people. You see that immediately when you see people that are 200 years old that are being sent checks for Social Security. Some of them are actually being sent checks, so we're tracing that down, and I have a feeling that Pam is going to do a very good job with that. But you have a lot of fraud. But no, we're not doing anything on this.
President Donald Trump at his cabinet meeting at the White House, referring to Pam, the Attorney General Pam Bondi. This after the House passed the budget resolution drafted by the Republicans Tuesday night. Congresswoman and new mom, Brittany Peterson, Democrat from Colorado, spoke on the House floor after that passage. She had flown back from maternity leave to vote.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today with my newborn Sam, who's just 4 weeks old. Unfortunately, I wasn't given the opportunity to vote remotely after giving birth, but I wasn't going to let that stop me from being here to represent my constituents and vote no on this disastrous Republican budget proposal. Republicans and Trump promised to lower costs on day one, and instead their priorities have been focused on ripping health care away from kids, seniors, moms, and others who need it most. And this is not going to save money. It includes people like my mom who work for hourly wages but are still unable to afford health care. When you don't have access to health care, you show up in the ER. This is going to have a huge burden on our hospitals and unfortunately will have skyrocketing costs. I agree, Sam. Hospitals will bear this burden. It also slashes SNAP, taking food off the plates for seniors, veterans, and kids, all to fund tax breaks for billionaires like Elon Musk while increasing our national deficit by trillions of dollars. How can anyone show their face in their district after voting yes for this?
Congresswoman Brittany Peterson, Democrat from Colorado, and her baby on the House floor Tuesday night. The House and Senate have now passed different versions of a budget resolution. The Senate version does not have tax cuts or the spending cuts. The two chambers will need to negotiate a final bill that can pass both chambers. This is also that later this year there can be legislation with parts of the policy agenda from the Trump administration that can pass through the budget reconciliation process, which cannot be filibustered by the Democrats in the Senate. And this story from The Hill, top Republicans are digging in their heels against restricting President Trump's powers in funding negotiations with Democrats as both sides struggle to strike a deal to avert a government shutdown next month. House Appropriations Chair Tom Cole, Republican of Oklahoma, told reporters on Wednesday that substantial differences remain between both parties as Congress stares down a March 14th deadline to pass legislation to keep the government running. Cole explained not so much on numbers, but over the presidential power issue with the Democrats, differences between the House and the Senate. The article says that Democrats have pressed for assurances that a bipartisan funding deal that emerges from talks won't be undercut by President Trump and his Department of Government Efficiency's sweeping operation to reshape the federal government. That was from The Hill. And this is Washington Today. House Republicans, begins an E&E News by Politico article, are aiming for a quick assault against Biden administration appliance standards and a key Inflation Reduction Act program. This week, the House will vote to rescind two Biden regulations, an EPA rule fining oil and gas operators for exceeding methane emission limits, an action mandated by the Democrats' 2022 climate law, and a Department of Energy efficiency standard for gas-fired water heaters the Republicans have derided as a radical ban. Lawmakers are planning to use the Congressional Review Act to overturn both rules. The law allows Congress to undo recently finalized actions by simple majority. That was the E&E News article. Today was the methane bill. It passed. Vote was 220 to 206 with one present. Congressman Randy Weber, Republican from Texas, spoke in favor.
It is a new day in America, and once again, House Republicans are standing up for hardworking Texans and Americans by rolling back another harmful rule pushed through by the Biden administration. Mr. Speaker, I call him Biden because I think he's Obama's third term. The latest scheme slaps new taxes on our energy producers, the very folks who keep our gas prices low and our economy running strong. We're not going to sit back and let the Biden administration strangle our energy industry with unnecessary costs. It's absolutely time to strike down this destructive natural gas tax and protect America's energy independence. Now, my friends on the other side of the aisle want to claim that President Biden, I'll use his term, this natural gas tax won't hurt producers who are in compliance, quote, end quote. Well, newsflash, that's a bait and switch, Mr. Speaker. Under the current waste emission charge regulations, the so-called regulatory compliance exemption only applies if methane emission regulations are in place in every applicable state. But here's the catch. Many states haven't adopted these regulations, which means producers can't even comply with these rules that don't exist. In other words, the exemption, quote unquote, isn't really an exemption at all. It's just another backdoor tax designed to squeeze the very industry that keeps Americans powered. This isn't just bureaucratic red tape, Mr. Speaker. It's a direct attack on Texas jobs, bless you, Texas families, and energy producers who fuel our nation. I'm proud to support my colleagues in striking down this burdensome tax and standing up for the hardworking men and women of the Lone Star State and our great nation.
Congressman Randy Weber, Republican of Texas, on the House floor. Congresswoman Jennifer McClellan, Democrat from Virginia, spoke against the resolution.
This resolution is another attempt by Republicans to put corporate polluters ahead of hardworking American people. And much like their budget adopted last night, it's a handout for billionaires and large corporations. Despite President Trump's promise to cut energy costs, Republicans are actively working to raise American energy bills, not to mention the effect that reckless tariffs together with this policy that the Republicans are pushing will drive American energy bills and prices at the pump sky high. But I guess those high prices are worth the cost to Republicans if it means big oil and gas are pleased. The methane emission reduction program was created to make sure that these big corporations pay for their own pollution. But I guess my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would prefer that American families cover the costs of corporate pollution, because under this resolution, the American people will be stuck footing the bill. That's egregious. It is egregious to let the American people bear the burden of industry's pollution, because it's not just the cost to their wallets, but it's also the cost to their health and safety. The oil and gas sector is the single largest industrial source of methane pollution in the United States, responsible for nearly a third of our emissions. We know that this pollution to our air has powerful effects on our climate. It's driving worse national disasters. It's devastating wildfires and hurricanes that we've seen, fueled by climate change, aren't just our children's problem, they're here today. The pollution that this methane gas produces affects our children's health today. It affects their respiratory health, among other things. But while Republicans are pushing tax breaks for billionaires and corporate polluters, they'll get a pat on the back from industry today. But Democrats are thinking about the future and the world that our children and their children will inherit. Will it be livable? Will they be able to breathe? I urge my colleagues to put the American people now and in the future, the American people and families over polluters, and vote no on HJ Res 35.
Congresswoman Jennifer McClellan, Democrat from Virginia, on the House floor. The resolution passed by a vote of 220 to 206 with one voting present. Mostly party line. There were 6 Democrats who joined the majority of Republicans in voting yes. Henry Cuellar of Texas, Jared Golden of Maine, Vicente Gonzalez of Texas, Adam Gray of California, Kristen McDonald-Rivet of Michigan, Marie Glusenkamp Perez of Washington State. And one Republican voted no, Brian Fitzpatrick of Pennsylvania. Joyce Beatty, Democrat of Ohio, voted present. The resolution now being considered in the Senate. From Fox News, the Senate Wednesday afternoon confirmed President Donald Trump's nominee for U.S. Trade Representative, Jamieson Greer. The vote was 56 to 43. Greer, who previously served as Chief of Staff to former USTR Robert Lighthizer during Trump's first term, has been credited with assisting in imposing tariffs on China and renegotiating the trade agreement with Canada and Mexico during the first administration. He is also a lawyer and Air Force Judge Advocate General's Corps veteran with one deployment to Iraq. That was from Fox News. The leaders of the Senate Finance Committee spoke on the Senate floor before this vote. Democrat Ron Wyden of Oregon went first.
Donald Trump was elected president largely on the promise of lowering prices for American families and remaking the global economy to America's benefit. 6 weeks into his president, what he has shown is a willingness to impose staggering costs on our families, workers, and businesses in order to settle scores on issues that have nothing to do with trade or the economy. He gets headlines, his wealthy friends get tax breaks, and American families get stuck with higher prices and bigger bills. I oppose this nomination, and I certainly have nothing against Mr. Greer personally. I just believe in this position he'll be a rubber stamp for the Trump tax, the knee-jerk decision to slap tariffs on nearly everything Americans buy and make high prices even higher. Mr. Greer has embraced the Trump chaos strategy, which is a slap in the face to farmers, manufacturers, and communities across the country. They are sounding the alarm about how the Trump program is already costing them sales overseas and jobs here at home. Our country needs a U.S. trade representative who will be the point person on trade for this administration. And I just don't have the confidence in Mr. Greer for that job.
Senator Ron Wyden, Democrat of Oregon, Finance Committee ranking member on the Senate floor. The committee's chair, Republican Mike Crapo of Idaho, supported the nomination.
I think I ought to just probably set a couple of facts straight about President Trump's utilization of the various policies that he has in the past term when he was president the first time. It was said that wages went up, prices went up, wages went down, prices went up, and that people were going to face terrible, dire consequences if he's able to follow his trade policies again in this term. The reality is that under President Trump, wages went up, jobs went up, unemployment went down, benefits went up, the economy grew dramatically, and we had the strongest economy in our lifetimes because of the policies President Trump pursued. So I don't think people should let these politics of fear, saying that everything that President Trump does is going to hurt people, convince them otherwise. The Office of the U.S. Trade Representative, created in 1962 by Congress, develops and coordinates U.S. international trade policy and oversees trade negotiations with other countries. The U.S. Trade Representative, the role for which Mr. Greer is nominated, historically and statutorily serves as the United States principal advisor, negotiator, and spokesperson on trade issues. Mr. Greer is well suited for these roles, as demonstrated during his previous tenure as USTR Chief of Staff, when he worked with both sides of the aisle in negotiating and securing congressional approval of the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, which passed the Senate 89-10. And I would note that the previous U.S. Trade Representative, who is now being replaced by Mr. Greer, and President Biden himself for the past 4 years, refused to actually negotiate any bilateral trade agreements with other nations. None. Throughout the nomination process, Mr. Greer demonstrated his strong commitment to work with the Congress in a bipartisan fashion to advance the interests of our farmers, ranchers, fishers, and workers.
Senator Mike Crapo, Republican of Idaho, chair of the Finance Committee on the Senate floor. The Senate went on to confirm Jamieson Greer as U.S. Trade Representative by a vote of 56-43. Mostly party line. 5 Democratic senators voted yes. John Fetterman of Pennsylvania, John Hickenlooper of Colorado, Gary Peters and Alyssa Slotkin of Michigan, and Sheldon Whitehouse from Rhode Island. 1 Republican voted no, Rand Paul of Kentucky. Wall Street today, the Dow down 188, NASDAQ up 48, S&P up a fraction. From Reuters, a child in West Texas has died of measles, state health officials said on Wednesday, the first reported U.S. death from the highly contagious disease in a decade, as a Texas outbreak has grown from a handful of cases to more than 130 across 2 states. The child, who was not vaccinated against the disease, died overnight in a children's hospital, the Texas Health Department said in a statement. U.S. Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. spoke about this at today's cabinet meeting at the White House.
There's a measles outbreak in Texas at the moment in which a child is reported to have died. Do you have concerns about that, and have you asked Secretary Kennedy to look into that?
Well, why don't we, Bobby, do you want to speak on that?
We are following the measles epidemic every day. I think there's 124 people who have contracted measles at this point in Gaines County, Texas. Mainly, we're told in the Mennonite community, there are 2 people who have died, but we're watching it, and there are about 20 people hospitalized, mainly for quarantine. We're watching it. We put out a post on it yesterday, and we're going to continue to follow it. Incidentally, there have been 4 measles outbreaks this year. In this country last year, there were 16. So it's not unusual. We have measles outbreaks every year.
Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. at today's cabinet meeting with President Trump at the White House. An NBC News reporter writing on X after the first measles death in a decade, a child. Health and Human Services Secretary Kennedy in a cabinet meeting seemed to downplay the Texas outbreak, saying outbreaks were not unusual. He also said the 18 kids hospitalized were mainly for quarantine. A pediatrician on the ground said they were admitted because they couldn't breathe. Washington Today continues in a moment.
C-SPAN Now is a free mobile app featuring your unfiltered view of what's happening in Washington, live and on demand. Keep up with the day's biggest events with live streams of floor proceedings and hearings from the U.S. Congress, White House events, the courts, campaigns, and more from the world of politics, all at your fingertips. You can also stay current with the latest episodes of Washington Journal and find scheduling information for C-SPAN's TV networks and C-SPAN Radio, plus a variety of compelling podcasts. C-SPAN Now is available at the Apple Store and Google Play, or visit our website, cspan.org/cspan now. C-SPAN Now, your front row seat to Washington, anytime, anywhere.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app and wherever you get your podcasts. A few more headlines. From The Guardian, the White House on Wednesday reportedly denied reporters from Reuters, the AP, and other news organizations access to President Donald Trump's first cabinet meeting, in keeping with the administration's new policy regarding media coverage. Reuters is reporting that the White House denied access to an AP photographer and 3 reporters from Reuters, HuffPost, and Der Tagesspiegel, a German newspaper. TV crews from ABC and Newsmax, along with correspondents from Axios, The Blaze, Bloomberg News, and NPR, were permitted to cover the event. And from Fox News, Florida Republican Byron Donalds has joined the list of House members running for governor. He said Tuesday evening on Fox News, "I'm here to announce my candidacy to be the next governor of the great state of Florida." Fox writes the move is not a surprise, with President Donald Trump posting on social media last week that he would endorse the third-term congressman from Naples if he entered the race. Washington Post article, the Supreme Court appeared to support the idea of making it easier for men, whites, and straight people to sue for job discrimination based on oral arguments Wednesday in the case of an Ohio woman who claimed she faced anti-straight bias in the workplace. In a moment, we'll talk to the reporter who wrote that article. First, here is Justice Elena Kagan questioning Ohio Solicitor General T. Elliott Geiser.
I think that that's the absolutely critical language in this opinion. Because Ames is heterosexual, she must make a showing in addition to the usual ones for establishing a prima facie case. And then it says, Ames's prima facie case would have been easy to make had she belonged to the relevant minority group, here gay people. So, this is what the court did.
Well, and we can't retreat from what the court here said, but we think the best way to construe that language is consistent. But nevertheless, I think
the best way to construe that language is as the language says.
Well, Justice Kagan, yes, the court said what it said. The important point is the prima facie step that this court has laid out needs to be complete enough before the employer has any burden under Title VII to show an inference of discrimination.
You agree that those passages are wrong?
We're not defending the exact language there. This per curiam, we asked for...
The exact language, or you're defending something like that language? It's a little bit of a peculiar situation, isn't it? Because this is what the court said, and you're up here, and I don't know exactly what to make of this. Do you think that that's right, or do you think that it's wrong?
I think the idea that you hold people to different standards because of their protected characteristics is wrong. And if there's any upshot from this case, let reverse discrimination completely fall out of the federal reporter.
So you agree with petitioner and the Solicitor General on?
on that major premise point. But we don't
Which is the question presented.
Well, we think that the question presented here is what must a plaintiff do to show at the prima facie step that there's an inference of discrimination? And we don't think Ms. Ames did that, and we think that saying that what the United States says, that just eliminating the two most common reasons.
That could be all sorted out on remand, right? I mean, all we have before us is really what Justice Kagan was reading, I thought.
Well, our argument is that this court reviews judgments, and the judgment was correct. I think that everyone here agrees that everyone should be treated equally.
Ohio Solicitor General T. Elliott Geiser, questioned by Supreme Court Justice Elena Kagan. With more on the oral argument in the Supreme Court case Ames v. Ohio Department of Youth Services involving claim of reverse discrimination, on the phone is Justin Jouvenal, Supreme Court reporter for the Washington Post. Thank you so much for being with us. You write there appears to be a majority of justices ready to change the standards in these discrimination lawsuits.
Yeah, so the Supreme Court the justices were actually in pretty striking agreement on changing the standard, which is not something we typically see from a pretty ideologically divided court. But right now, in about half of the nation's appeals courts, people who are members, majority groups, that's like white people, straight people, or men, have to meet a higher bar to prove a job discrimination claim than groups who are minorities. And the justices appear ready to make it easier for white people, straights, and men to prove their job discrimination claims by eliminating this higher standard.
From the questions you heard and the answers, what are they basing that upon? Why the change?
Yeah, so if you recall, the 1964 Civil Rights Act outlawed discrimination in the workplace based on race, sex, religion, and other factors. So the plaintiff in the case is making the argument that you can't hold members of majority groups and members of minority groups to different standards when they're trying to prove a job discrimination claim. She's arguing that this is a fundamental violation of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which says all people need to be treated the same in the workplace. And the justices seemed receptive to that argument. And, at one point, Justice Neil M. Gorsuch, who's a conservative, said, we appear to be in, quote unquote, radical agreement on changing the standard.
The attorneys arguing before the Supreme Court from the Justice Department, Ohio, and the plaintiff were asked whether making it easier to sue means a flood of lawsuits. What was the response to those concerns?
So the attorney for the woman who brought the lawsuit, Marlene Ames, said he thinks that those claims are kind of overblown. Right now, about half of the appeals courts in the country employ this higher standard for majority groups to prove a job discrimination claim. And he said, if you look to the other half of appeals courts, we haven't seen a huge surge in job discrimination claims by members of majority groups in those circuits. So, even if the change happens in the other half of the courts in the country, he said we're not going to see a big surge. But, I've talked with some human resources experts and some employment lawyers, and they think there could very well be an uptick in job discrimination claims by white people, straights, and men in many places.
We're talking with reporter Justin Jouvenal from the Washington Post. The Trump administration has been emphasizing eliminating DEI programs. How would a ruling in this case impact that, if at all?
So this case is not directly about DEI initiatives. The Trump administration has said Trump has said he wants to root out DEI initiatives in the federal government and has issued executive orders on that front. He's also ordered the Justice Department and the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission to investigate DEI initiatives in the private sector. So what some experts, in employment law say is Trump's efforts combined with a ruling for the plaintiff in this case that was before the Supreme Court that could make it easier for, white people and other majority groups to sue for job discrimination could actually, make companies, think twice about their DEI initiatives, and it may push them towards, pulling back on some of them.
And finally, how common are job discrimination lawsuits that involve a white plaintiff, sort of the reverse discrimination standard?
Not very common. The vast majority of cases are brought by minorities.
Justin Jouvenal, Supreme Court reporter for The Washington Post. You can find his articles at WashingtonPost.com and on X at @JJouvenal. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Enforcement of civil rights law also came up today at the Senate Judiciary Committee confirmation hearing for Harmeet Dillon, nominated for Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights. Senator Chuck Grassley, Republican of Iowa, posed these questions.
Ms. Dillon, you'll have to protect the civil rights of all Americans under diversity, equity, and inclusion. The previous administration imposed a nationwide regime that discriminated against some people. The Civil Rights Division completely failed to enforce our nation's civil rights laws. So how will you approach enforcing our civil rights laws different from the previous administration?
Chairman Grassley, thank you for that question. The Civil Rights Division has 11 sections, and each of them is charged with an important duty under the Constitution and the statutes, of course. So my approach is going to be to meet with the section heads in each of those sections, understand the present work that they are doing, and then assessing the extent to which that work is consistent with my view of the civil rights statutes and the priorities of the Department of Justice. And I think the President and Attorney General Bondi have made clear that diversity, equity, inclusion, as it has been applied to use racial quotas to deny people equal access to education, employment, even potentially housing and other aspects of civil life that are covered by the civil rights statutes, are inappropriate. And so we'll certainly be taking a close look at all of those and enforcing the law equally in favor of all Americans.
Would you approach Title VII discrimination civil rights laws and use it against companies that discriminate on the basis of race?
Senator, if the facts support such a prosecution or a civil litigation, I certainly would do that. It is inappropriate in my view, and I think Title VII's language is clear that racial discrimination is inappropriate in hiring. And so that is certainly a priority that I would undertake, and one that I've undertaken in private practice as well.
The same question as it relates to Title VI against universities that receive federal funds but who discriminate on the basis of race?
Senator, we have a problem throughout the United States, not just on the basis of race in universities, but also religion. We've seen anti-Semitism sweep the nation, and it is very problematic that many people of the Jewish faith are barred by professors and fellow students from access to the classroom. So yes, in addition to race, I would see religious discrimination and other forms of discrimination on campuses as an appropriate target for the Civil Rights Division.
Harmeet Dillon, nominated for Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights. Questioned by Senator Chuck Grassley, Republican of Iowa, at today's Judiciary Committee hearing. There were two other nominees also testifying, John Sauer for U.S. Solicitor General and Aaron Reitz, nominated for Assistant Attorney General for Legal Policy. You can find this full hearing at our video library at cspan.org. From ABC News, President Donald Trump said he will not make any security guarantees to Ukraine, quote, beyond very much. As the United States eyes signing a minerals deal with Ukraine, Ukrainian President Zelensky has said Western security guarantees are necessary for a ceasefire in the war with Russia. When asked during the first cabinet meeting of his second term on Wednesday what security guarantees he's willing to make, President Trump responded, "I'm not going to make security guarantees beyond very much. We're going to have Europe do that. We're talking about Europe as the next door neighbor, but we're going to make sure everything goes well." That was from ABC News. President Trump confirmed during the cabinet meeting that President Zelensky will be in Washington, D.C. on Friday.
President Zelensky is going to be coming on Friday. That's now confirmed, and we're going to be signing an agreement, which will be a very big agreement. And I want to thank Howard and Scott for the job you guys did in putting it together. You really did an amazing job. and that'll be on rare earth and other things. And as you know, we're in for probably $350 billion. Europe is in for $100 billion. And that's a big difference. So we're in for probably 3 times as much, and yet it's very important to everybody, but Europe's very close. We have a big ocean separating us, so it's very important for Europe, and they hopefully will step up and do maybe more than they're doing, and maybe a lot more. The previous administration put us in a very bad position, but we've been able to make a deal where we're going to get our money back, and we're going to get a lot of money in the future, and I think that's appropriate because we have taxpayers that shouldn't be footing the bill, and they shouldn't be footing the bill at more than the Europeans are paying. So it's all been worked out. We're happy about it, and I think that very importantly, we're going to be able to make a deal. Most importantly, by far, we're going to make a deal with Russia and Ukraine to stop killing people. They'll stop killing young Russian soldiers and young Ukrainian soldiers and other people in addition in the towns and cities. And we will consider that a very important thing and a big accomplishment because it was going nowhere until this administration came in. They hadn't spoken to President Putin in 2 years, and so we'll keep you advised.
President Donald Trump at his cabinet meeting at the White House. BBC News writes, President Trump told his cabinet meeting today that the U.S. has spent 3 times as much as Europe on Ukraine, but we can't find any evidence to back that up. Data suggests the U.S. has spent a lot less than the $300 to $350 billion that Trump has frequently said the U.S. has spent. The Kiel Institute, which tracks defense spending, has put the figure at $119.7 billion. U.S. Department of Defense has also done a calculation which looks at a broader range of activity in Europe and includes replenishing defense stocks. Their figure is $182.8 billion, still considerably less than the figure the president has mentioned. We asked the White House where their figure had come from, but we haven't had an answer. Europe, according to Kiel figures, has actually spent more on Ukraine than the U.S. They calculate EU institutions and all European countries combined have spent around $138.7 billion. That was the article from BBC News. The war in Ukraine will also be on the agenda when British Prime Minister Keir Starmer comes to Washington on Thursday. The Prime Minister spoke about it today in London during Prime Minister's questions in the House of Commons.
This week marked 3 years since Putin's barbaric invasion of Ukraine. The courage of the Ukrainians is inspiring, and across this House we stand with them for as long as it takes. Mr. Speaker, that's why we're increasing defence spending to 2.5% of GDP by April 2027, with an ambition to reach 3% in the next Parliament as economic and fiscal conditions allow. And this afternoon, of course, I will travel to the US to have discussions with President Trump about the enduring security partnership between our two countries.
British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, head of the Labour Party, during Prime Minister's question time in the House of Commons. Conservative Party leader Kemi Badenoch also brought up the war in Ukraine and the Prime Minister's visit to the U.S.
Mr. Speaker, I wish the Prime Minister every success on his trip to Washington. The visit to see President Trump must serve our national interest. The Prime Minister and I are completely united in our support for Ukraine as a proud and sovereign nation. Yeah. What specific steps will he take to ensure Ukraine is at the negotiating table for any peace settlement?
Well, I thank her for her words about the forthcoming trip. And it is right, and I think the whole House will think it's right, that Ukraine must be at the table at negotiations. There can be no negotiations about Ukraine without Ukraine. That has been my consistent position in all of the discussions that I've had. That will continue to be my position, because this is about the sovereignty of Ukraine and their ability to decide for themselves the future of their country. So they must be at the table.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Prime Minister for that answer, and as I said, I wish him every success. We want to support him on this issue.
British Prime Minister Keir Starmer and opposition leader Kemi Badenoch during Prime Minister's questions. From the Independent newspaper in Great Britain, Sir Keir Starmer has been accused of a cover-up over his increase in defense spending after he refused to say whether it includes funding the cost of handing over the Chagos Islands to Mauritius. The Prime Minister told MPs on Wednesday that the uplift is aimed at boosting our capability on defense and security in Europe, but stopped short of ruling out using the cash to lease back the joint UK-US Diego Garcia airbase located on Chagos. Tory leader Kemi Badenoch said Sir Keir Starmer's failure to disclose where the money for Chagos was coming from meant he had all but confessed it would come from the defense budget. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Sign up for C-SPAN's evening newsletter word for word, and we'll send you the stories making headlines in Washington every day. Subscribe at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.